tonight. The man who threw the pitch that Hank hit for the 715th home run, that's Al Downing, and he's standing by with Kevin Burkhardt. Kevin?
All right, there, Gary, thanks very much. Al, you know, we were talking, and I don't know that every player would be able to embrace the moment in history like you have. I mean, you have a great career. You're an all-star. You won 20 games. But, you know, you've embraced it. You're here celebrating that moment tonight. Why?
Well, first off, because of what Mr. Aaron has represented not only to Major League Baseball, but to society, and especially to me as a young black player coming up in the major leagues. He's been an exemplary statesman for the game, and anytime I called him and asked a favor to talk to some youngsters, he's been more than gracious to talk to them, and never was a big to-do about it. And never in the course of the game when I pitched against him did he ever try to show you up. It was like, one professional against the other. If you got him out, you got him. Home run, he ran around the bases and took his place in the dugout.
Yeah, a little different. How did he set an example for you and other black players coming up?
Well, first off, by the way he handled himself on the field. I never saw him argue with an umpire. I'm sure there might have been instances where he might have been a little upset, but he did it in a way that he didn't try to show up the umpire or himself. And secondly, he just played hard game of baseball. And I think for years, I mean, not taking anything away from any other players, but he was overlooked playing in Milwaukee. And even when he came down here to Atlanta, he's pretty much overlooked because this was a football town.
Yeah.
And until Hank came on that quest of hitting 715 home runs, baseball was like the third child in town after football and basketball. But he was out in the vanguard, and he kept plodding away, and all of a sudden you look up and this guy's got 700 home runs very quietly, and people said, gee, where'd this guy come from? Well, you never heard him beating his own horn. He was just going out and doing his job.
Al, going into that night, what did you think about? I mean, did it cross your mind that it could happen that night against you as a pitcher? What were you thinking about going into that game?
Well, it can happen anytime you're in a situation like that and you have a home run a hitter of that caliber. Oh, yeah, sure, it can happen. But you have to keep your mind on what your job is. And my job in that game was to keep our team in the game and win the ball game. Now, if he hit a home run, so be it. But hopefully we're going to still win that ball game.
Al, you pitch around him that first at bat? Tell me about that.
Unintentionally, intentionally, I pitched around him as it turned out. But the fans let me know.
What did he deal with? We've heard now about all the death threats and the letters, and he's said that he's kept those letters. But what did he deal with? What did he have to deal with internally, the pressure, just going through that?
Well, from what I read in his autobiography and all of that, he dealt with the probably normal thing that would happen in a situation like that, where all of a sudden the black man is on the verge of breaking a record set by a white man in our society in the South in the 60s.
Yeah.
It was like, well, you're not good enough to do it. And then, of course, when I'm out on the mound, it was like, well, you must have grooved it, for your brother. I said, hey, it could have been my father up there. I would have tried to get him out. So I understood what he had gone through by virtue of my having been in the minor leagues in the 60s and in the South, and knowing the things I had gone through, where we couldn't stay in the hotels with our teammates. We couldn't eat in the restaurants with our teammates. So it was something from a societal point of view we had all encountered. And so we had that common bond. And so that's why I think we never try to show one another up, because we knew the ground that we had treaded.
Did you have a conversation the next day, and if so, what was said?
Basically, we met behind home plate in the old Fulton County Stadium, and it was just before batting practice. And I said, Hank, I just want to congratulate you and tell you how proud I am of you for the way you've handled this. And he says, well, don't you feel badly about it. He said you're still a good pitcher. Yeah. And he's always said that, and he's never tried to make it look as if, well, I was less than a good pitcher. And he's always given me that graciousness, and I appreciate that, because I never said I was a great pitcher. I tell people that all the time, but I said I was a good pitcher. Put me out there, I'll get the job done.
That's pretty good, though. That's what he told you, kind of pumping you up. Let me ask you this. You're telling us about society and certainly how it was for you as a ball player back then. Let's say that moment happened today. How do you think it would be different, and how would you hope that the whole situation would be different? I mean, Hank has said that he really wasn't able to enjoy it. He was happy to get it over with.
Well, he wasn't able to enjoy it because the mood in our country at that time was still very tense from the 60s.
Sure.
And all the turmoil we had undergone in the 60s, not only in the South, but in the North also. Because I was just talking to a young lady here who worked for the Braves, and in the 60s, she was back in Detroit, and we saw what happened, it burned the town down. So I think today people are a lot more enlightened. and you're able to, as much as you might disagree with black political leaders, you understand that if they're preaching and talking about the things that apply to you and are going to make life better for you and your family, you listen. And I think that's education. And I think back in the 60s, we were dealing with people who were educated, but they weren't educated to be a listener. They were educated to try to look down on someone all the time.
Al, is there a concern, worry on your part, just on the lack of African Americans in the game today? The numbers have gone down. Does that concern you?
It's a big concern. I think maybe a lot of us older players have not concentrated diligently enough to convince these young kids that, look, football is a game that it's a wonderful game, but it's a very debilitating game. And if you can play football, then you have the mindset to play baseball. And if you have that talent to play baseball, you can have success in the baseball field. We saw that with Bo Jackson. We saw that with Deion Sanders. We saw that with Brian McRae. So there have been guys who could do it, and there are other guys who have done it. But the thing is, you have to let them know that don't get stuck where you feel that there's only one sport that you're saddled with. And I think that the game of baseball in the inner city is pretty much lost because you don't have the commercial backing that we had back when I was a kid. All those facilities have gone to the suburbs. And because blacks aren't living in the suburbs, they're in the cities, you don't get to partake in those activities.
Well, now that's great insight from you. And one more thing before we let you go. Let's just say a youngster comes up to you. They read about the moment. They obviously never saw the moment. They want to know what Hank is like. What would you tell them?
Probably one of the nicest gentlemen you ever met. I've always said the nicest person I've ever met in my life was Elston Howard. And Hank's right there with him.
I'd have to say I just met you, but I feel the same way about you. Thanks so much for the time.
Well, thank you.
Gary, Ron, let's go back to you.
Al's